Hello there, welcome and thank you for joining us for another edition of the Evening Review. My name is Ogito Greig, and in studio with me this evening I have Dr. Bryan Eiseb, the Director of the Financial Intelligence Center. Good evening, Doctor. How are you?
Good evening, Ogito, and good evening to all the viewers.
Thank you very much. You were out of country recently and you've just returned. Where were you?
Well, Ogito, I was just around. I didn't go to the anticipated FATF plenary in Mexico. I had one of my general managers represent the country because I had some other commitments.
Yes, but that was a very important occasion, the FATF plenary, especially since Namibia is grey listed. How did we get grey listed?
Well, our grey listing has got some historical context to it. You know, Namibia is part of the global community under the Financial Action Task Force watchdog ambit. And we are affiliated to the Financial Action Task Force through our, what we call our regional Financial Action Task Force body. So, in our case, it's the ESAMLAG, or the Eastern and Southern African Anti-Money Laundering Group. So what happens is that on a periodic cycle, the member countries get reviewed or peer reviewed to assess the technical and effectiveness of our anti-money laundering framework and counter-terrorism financing framework. So this is essentially what happened since around 2022, 2023. In 2023, our report was adopted by the ESAMLAG Council of Ministers, and essentially Namibia then had about 1 year to remediate about 72 action items at the time. And during a period of 1 year, we managed to remediate 59 of those in 1 year. And ultimately, and unfortunately, we were then grey listed because of the 13 remaining deficiencies in February 2024.
Okay.
So that's in short the background and the mechanisms that led to Namibia being grey listed.
Okay. How big of a problem is money laundering and terrorism financing in Namibia?
Well, to measure the impact and the extent of money laundering in Namibia, you have to have regard to our national risk assessment. And our national risk assessment is a prerequisite, or it's a document that is compiled by the FIC in conjunction with various stakeholders, like the Namibian Police, the Office of the Prosecutor General, amongst others.
Yes.
And in that document, we identify what are the top priority crimes in Namibia. And at this point in time, our national risk assessment that was updated in 2023 would indicate that we have corruption, we have fraud, we have drug trafficking, we have environmental crimes as the top predicate, what we call predicate or underlying offenses.
Yes.
So essentially what happens, money laundering is the proceeds that is derived from a underlying offense, right? So you have that, and then obviously you have a crime of self-laundering.
Yeah.
So what has happened is that in our national risk assessment, we have identified these top priority crimes, and then we look at what is the prevalence of these crimes and what are the proceeds that are derived from. Now, there are several mechanisms that we can employ to determine what is the extent of money laundering in each of these top priority crimes.
Yeah.
And one of those mechanisms is, for example, what accountable institutions or reporting institutions, their obligations under the Financial Intelligence Act would be, for example, a banking institution or Bureau de Exchange would have to report certain suspicious transactions and certain suspicious activities to the Financial Intelligence Center. Yes. And that's an obligation under the law. And based on that, and dependent on the work that we do on that suspicious transaction or those various types of reports, we are able to determine what is the extent of money laundering within our jurisdiction, within the financial sector, for example. But not only the financial sector, we have what we call the DNFVPs, or the designated non-financial businesses and person,
Okay.
which is lawyers, real estate agents, amongst others. So they also have obligations to report certain behaviors that is suspicious to the center.
Oh.
And based on that, we can then establish, based on the reports that we have for a given period, and where we have confirmed the suspicion, we can then determine what is the extent of money laundering. And at this point in time, we normally publish the amount of money that we have intervened on in bank accounts in our annual report. And you would recall, for example, that last year it was close to about 100 million that the Financial Intelligence Center intervened on. And subsequent to that, there was preservation orders, which is a more permanent legal remedy or feature within the various anti-money laundering framework or laws that the Prosecutor General then uses. Based on our intervention, the Prosecutor General then goes to court and get a more permanent freezing or the recovery of those proceeds from illegal crimes.
Would there be consequences if, for instance, a lawyer comes across some of this questionable or suspicious behavior and doesn't report it?
Of course, laws always have consequences, otherwise it would be an ineffective law. So for example, if a lawyer has undertaken a business relationship with a client and did not what we call the customer due diligence, in other words, understanding what is Bryan Eiseb's profile, is he employed, what is his source of income. If a lawyer has not done that due diligence, he would fall foul of the law of the Financial Intelligence Act, amongst others. And we would be able to impose administrative fines, and the law also makes it a criminal offense, which is punishable by about $100 million or 30 years imprisonment.
Wow, that's very interesting. But coming back to Namibia's situation, we were grey listed. What was the consequence for the country?
Well, the consequence, there are obviously direct consequences and indirect consequences. I think one of the direct consequences was that we needed to remediate these 13 action items, which ranges across various spectrums. And that had a financial impact on the country. I recall that at the time we had to consolidate the budget and submit it to the Minister of Finance. And in my recollection, it was around 60 million that we needed to immediately get our hands on from the fiscus and correct issues or these strategic deficiencies across various institutions like the FIC, the Office of the Prosecutor General, the Namibian Police, the Master of the High Court, the Business and Intellectual Property. So it's quite an area of institutions that was involved in remediating, and that had a direct fiscal impact in this case. Apart from that, we were able to contain this matter at a macro level. Because it did not trickle down. I have not heard you say that, grey listing has impacted me to the extent that I don't have money in my account or my banking relationship was terminated because of grey listing. So at a micro level, the impact was very little, if at all any. But we were able to contain it at a macro level. And even at that level, we did not see any adverse circumstances or banking correspondent relationships that were severed as a result of grey listing. From an investor perspective, the same holds true. In fact, in my conversation with the NIPDB, we found that the investor confidence, contrary to popular belief, actually increased. So you would see from data released by the Bank of Namibia and in conjunction with the NIPDB that the investor inflows actually increased significantly during this period. But I think there is a reason for that, and the reason ultimately is the fact that Namibia's political commitment was there from the outset. From the time that we were grey listed, Namibia made political commitment and institutional commitment to self-correct, strengthen, and ensure that the strengthening of our criminal justice system is maintained into the future. So it's not just a matter of compliance at this point in time for us as a country. It's really a matter of ensuring that our criminal justice system and our AML CTF reforms is effective, it's implemented, and institutions are capacitated to implement these laws. So that's really the focus of all the agencies involved in this matter.
What is AML CTF?
AML is, sorry for that, it's anti-money laundering and counter-terrorism financing.
I see. I do remember though that when efforts began to correct, especially the civil society and the non-governmental organizations were struggling. Do you know if things have improved in terms of that?
In fact, thank you for reminding me, apart from the national institutions, again, this was a collective effort, and I always say that every Namibian was part of this effort, knowingly or unknowingly. I recall late last year we had an engagement with civil society in as far as their obligations, and we understand that civil society, some of them don't have deep pockets, so we give them advice, we give them training to strengthen their responsibilities, like an NPO, for example, a church or a welfare organization. How do they strengthen their compliance? And we want to enforce and we want to make the anti-money laundering laws effective. But we are also mindful of the unintended consequences. We acknowledge that welfare organizations do great work, but we also understand the potential of them being abused and exploited for terrorism financing and terrorist activities, for example. So civil society came on board. It was really a collective effort, and this is one of the learnings that I've taken away personally, is that when called upon and when you entrust everybody in Namibia to focus on one issue and drive this country forward, we can do that as a collective in unity.
Excellent. Thank you very much. We're just going to take a quick commercial break, but we'll be right back to continue this conversation.
Thank you.
So please stay with us. And welcome back to the Evening Review. My name is Okito Greg, and in studio with me this evening, Dr. Bryan Eiseb. He is the director of the Financial Intelligence Center, and he's telling us about the progress that has been made in getting Namibia off the grey list in terms of terrorism financing and money laundering. Please, Doctor, would you expand a little bit about the technical and operational reforms that have been implemented?
Some of the technical reforms was, for example, that we needed to amend certain laws. Amongst others, the Financial Intelligence Act, there was the Payment Systems Management Act. So there was quite a number of laws within the financial sector that had to be relooked. And you will recall that in 2023, I think this was a record-breaking initiative by Parliament, where they have passed at that time 4 new laws, and they have amended about 9 laws.
Yes.
But most of those laws were concentrated within the financial sector, and so that's a technical component. Obviously, once you have passed laws or amended laws, you now need to implement those laws to ensure or test the effectiveness. And I think that's largely where we have fallen short, and it also resulted in us being grey-listed. So fair enough, we were grey-listed, but what we have done now as the collective is to ensure that we start building capacity, first of all, within these institutions, so that the institutions being, chain linked, that the one institution is dependent on the other for the success. So we have had a comprehensive analysis in terms of what do we need to do, what is the critical path that we need to follow as a country to strengthen and implement these laws. So we have built capacity. For example, one key issue was the supervisory reach of the Financial Intelligence Center and NAMFISA over the entities that they supervise. Yeah. So we needed to enhance the capacity first of all, get some more human resources, build those resources, and then in the Namibian police and the ACC and the Office of the Prosecutor General, how do you investigate the parallel financial benefits that comes with a predicate or underlying offense? So in other words, if Bryan was arrested for corruption, did he benefit from that corruption? What is the financial and other benefits? Can we investigate this as a standalone or parallel to the main charge? So those are some of the capacities. And then in the Office of the Prosecutor General, capacitating them on prosecuting these technical and complex crimes. For example, building on virtual assets. How do you prosecute virtual assets? How do you investigate virtual assets? Yeah. So with the assistance of international technical partners, we were able to build capacity, and we are continue to build that capacity and ensure that we retain, and I think that's the important part, is that we need to retain the capacity that we have built and build on that, enhance that capacity within the institutions. For example, at the FICR, we have taken a position where we have said that we will no more recruit from the likes of the Namibian police and the Office of the Prosecutor General, because we weaken the link at some point. Yes. We have close collaboration with NAMRA, for example. It's one of the institutions that has been part of this journey all along. So we have close collaboration with NAMRA, the tax offense component within these predicate offenses. Yes. Is Bryan Eiseb, did he pay his tax? So we refer a lot of our suspicious transactions report, once we have done the analysis, to NAMRA to assess tax compliance, and NAMRA then obviously deals with those individuals in terms of their law and their mandate.
Dr. Eiseb, is it your work that is responsible for those of us with bank accounts now being familiar with the phrase KYC and all the know your client rigmarole that we have to go through?
Unfortunately, it's not my work, it's Namibia's work. All of us has that responsibility. Yes. As I said, it is our responsibility to ensure that Namibia is not labeled as a money laundering hub, yes, or a tax haven. So it's all of our responsibility. It is not an FIC responsibility. FIC is an institution created by government to ensure that we implement the laws that government, which we have mandated with a social responsibility. So government has passed that law and established the Financial Intelligence Center as a vehicle to ensure that our Ghetto and Bryan's future and their social stability and financial stability is secured and maintained.
Point well taken. Please elaborate a little bit about the oversight over non-financial organizations and professionals. How has that been improved?
So what we have done is what the FIC does, and also NAMFISA and the Bank of Namibia, is to employ what we call a risk-based perspective or a risk-based supervision plan. So we would naturally look at what is the size of a particular industry. Let's use lawyers. I'm a lawyer, so let me play at home. So we will look at what is the size of the law fraternity. Who are the big firms? Who are the medium firms? Who are the small firms?
Yeah.
What is the financial profile of these institutions? And then what is the clientele of these institutions? For example, you get law firms that deal predominantly in transfers of mortgages. So we would, and that's one of the key areas that we look at. So we risk categorize them, and then we implement a plan on a 3-year cycle. So if you are in a high risk or flagged as a high risk entity, we would probably visit you more regular than Bryan that is a low risk entity.
Yeah.
And that's the methodology that we employ to ensure that our oversight is sufficient and aligned to international best practices.
Okay. Dr. Eiseb, you mentioned about the 13 areas that needed to be addressed. How far have we progressed now?
So what has happened since 2024, the way the FATF works and the grey listing process, or what is called the ICRG, the International Cooperation Working Group. So what is happening there is that you need to submit, or a country that is in that process need to submit periodic reports to the FATF.
Okay.
And then essentially the coordinating committee, which is spearheaded by the FIC, needs to present that report in person periodically. So every 3-4 months since 2024, we had to report on it. And we were making steady progress. Again, as I said, what we have done from a tactical and strategic point of view during the grey listing was to determine the critical flight path. And all these action items has got a due date.
Okay.
In common parlance, it's an audit.
Yeah.
And an audit, there's a due date by which you have to remedy those findings. And that's what we did as the National Coordinating Committee. We set a critical path according to which we had to fly, and we were able, as a matter of strategy, we submitted a voluntary report. Our very first report was a voluntary report, just to understand and assess the orientation of the reviewers. And at that point in time, we already got partially upgraded to partially compliant.
Okay.
And that gave us an indication as to what do we need to do as a country, what do we need to do at institutional level, and how do we take along the Namibian nation and communicate and ensure that we have a sustained political commitment, which has never wavered, by the way. So for us, that was important. And we are now at our 5th report, and our 5th report has yielded the results that we got last week, where the FATF initially indicated that Namibia substantially complied and warrants an on-site visit now to the country within the next month or two. So it's quite an intense time for us now. We are working around the clock to make sure that we prepare all the stakeholders and that we share the information that is needed, and how we should approach this on-site assessment that will be conducted.
Very good, and congratulations, and thank you very much. What's the next steps? And also, once we are off the grey list, what is the responsibility that each Namibian should take upon themselves to take us into the future?
Very good. That's a very, very fundamental question, and let me start with the first part of the question. So where we are now, what we need to do, obviously the country needs to prepare all the stakeholders for the on-site. Yesterday I just got the date, the timelines, and our on-site is currently scheduled for the 23rd to the 25th of April.
Okay.
So that's when the on-site examination will be, or assessment will be held. So we need to prepare from now until that time. We need to engage all the stakeholders, starting with the Anti-Money Laundering Council, which is the policy advisory council within our country, and then have individual discussions with institutions, civil society, public sector, private sector, because that is the range of stakeholders that the examiners or the reviewers will be consulting during the 2 days that they will be here.
Okay.
And once they are done, they will then report their findings to us first, as a country, and that will then be tabled at the FATF plenary in June in Paris. And at that point in time, Namibia will then be considered to be finally taken off the grey list. So now, grey listing is really about compliance, but for us as an institution and the council as the policy advisor on these matters, it's not really about compliance is as a byproduct. For us, and your question, what does each and every Namibian has to do to make sure that we strengthen? I think we should not tolerate any form of corruption. We should not tolerate any form of fraud. We should report all these types of crimes to the authorities. Make sure that, you know, if you suspect something, report it to the authorities. We call upon our financial institutions to continuously strengthen their reporting mechanism, their ability to identify suspicious transactions, suspicious activity, report them to the FIC. We need to continuously strengthen the criminal justice system to ensure that we have capacity to identify these predicate offenses, be able to investigate money laundering offenses, prosecute them, put those that are responsible, hold them to account, and make sure that they do not benefit from the proceeds. We have a phrase or saying at the FIC, let's follow the money. So we're going to continue following the money. We're going to make sure that nobody benefits from the illegal activity, and that anybody that has committed any of these crimes or participated in money laundering is brought to book and face the consequences of the law.
Thank you very much, Dr. Eiseb, and that's all the time that we have. But please take that message to heart. Namibians, we don't tolerate any corruption. Have a great night and see you tomorrow evening on the next Evening Review.